Hello, welcome to Interabang Chats. Today we are happy to have with us Vanessa Veselka, whose second novel will be published on August 25th. It's called The Great Offshore Grounds. I've got my copy right here. It's all tabbed. Fantastic novel that I know that a lot of our readers are going to love. Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're really happy to have you here today. The book is quite the term that kept coming to my mind when I was reading the novel was Odyssey. There are a lot of personal journeys here that happen with the characters, both figuratively and literally, and it's a great book to kind of get into some discussion about. Did you want to start with reading a short passage for us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay. So the book is actually divided into 5 books. So I'm going to read the first lines. Book 1, Henry Hudson. Health to buzzards, cash to the drivers, oiler for the lords, and greasy luck to the lifers. The wedding. 15 miles south of Seattle and halfway across Puget Sound to the west is Maury Island. Shaped like an arrowhead aimed at the mainland, green as the inner fold of a grass blade, it can be seen from the air, cradled in the crook of an elbow of water. Tourists ride over on ferries to watch for whales and UFOs. Jets turn around overhead on their final approach to the airport. Even on days when there is no rain, mist filters through the evergreens until it pulls apart like threadbare cloth and burns off. The wedding was to be held in the afternoon at Point Robinson, the site of an old fog signal station that once housed a steam whistle fed by coal fire and water to warn away ships. In 1897, at the dawn of massive capital expansion and speculation, the whistle sounded for 528 hours, nearly killing the men who had to shovel the 35 tons of coal. Cargo had to be kept from the rocks, and who can halt the lumbering desires of the world? In 1915, the lighthouse with its state-of-the-art fifth-order Fresnel lens was built. Powered initially by oil vapor lamps, its beacon could be seen for 12 miles. The lens was the perfect manifestation of Victorian technology, replacing simple flat lenses with faceted crystal domes, prisms cut into tiers that made it both astonishingly beautiful and a breakthrough in optics. The Fresnel lens had a theoretically infinite capacity to capture diffuse light and, by way of internal reflection, cast it like a spear through darkness. It lit stages in celluloid, Polaroid shots and retinas for ID scans, and on Point Robinson, it lit Puget Sound. These days, every modern ship has a GPS, and the little lighthouse is only decoration on a brochure, a destination for a grade school field trip. The mechanisms that rotated the original lantern remain on the first floor, which is now a tiny museum of technology with gauges and wheels and iron bolted in the base with lines that lead nowhere and do nothing. Back across the sound in Seattle, Livy looked out the window of her basement apartment. Her father was getting married that afternoon, and though it was already late April, a cold, wet breeze still whistled through the gaps in the caulking, turning her skin to gooseflesh. A few feet away stood her sister, Cheyenne, poorly slept and already dressed. "I'm freezing," said Cheyenne. "I'm turning on the space heater." "Turn on the oven. They charge us for electricity," Livy said. Cheyenne rolled her eyes, but went over to the little white gas stove. Cranking the temperature to broil, she leaned back against the oven door so she could feel the heat on her hamstrings while the oven warmed. Yesterday, they'd spent the whole day picking rocks out of Livy's landlord's garden in trade for a patch of soil near the sunny side of the fence so that Livy could grow food. It wasn't political. Livy didn't care about pesticides or permaculture. She was just the cheapest person Cheyenne had ever known. She lived off past-date food. She washed her clothes once a month with a teaspoon of dish soap in a tub. She made her own bras. Cheyenne was pretty sure she would have rinsed and reused dental dams if she thought it would work. Recently, Livy had become convinced that she could feed herself off 3 square yards of land. It was ridiculous. But since Cheyenne had appeared out of nowhere and moved in on her without warning or rent, she didn't have much of a say. Taller and unfreckled, Cheyenne had chosen a rose-colored cap-sleeve shirt with eyelets and a pair of black pinstripe suit pants. She could pass in the crowd they were going to be in today. Her secondhand clothes came off as vintage, while her misadventures in body art made her seem a fine vase, badly cracked and chipping, but a greedy accent to any room. Cyril didn't come to my wedding, Cheyenne said. Why should I go to his? Did you invite him? Hell no. He would have arrived like a lord and expected to walk me down the aisle. Here, let me give you away. Oh, hey, Dad, I'm pretty sure you already did that. You're right, he would have, said Livy. So why are we even going? I have a day off work. It's cheaper than a movie. I'm tired of ramen and hot dogs. There'll be rich people food, so I'm taking Tupperware. Please don't make it obvious, said Cheyenne. We're already going to look so out of place. Because you have jailhouse tats of hearts and clubs on your knuckles, or because I don't shave and look like a landscaper? Cheyenne spread her fingers of her left hand. Not just clubs and hearts. The one on my thumb is a diamond, and the pinky is a spade. You just can't tell anymore. Livy crossed to where she'd laid out her newly washed blue painter's pants and pulled them on over her long johns. I'm going to the wedding because it's a show of support that costs me nothing. I've never thought of him as a dad, so I don't care. At his worst, he's just a big blank, a disappointment. He gets a clean slate. That's my wedding present, a pass. It's the only decent move. I shot my better angels, said Cheyenne. They're angels. You can't kill them. If they were real, you could. Livy could feel Cheyenne's eyes burning holes into her ribs. She zipped her fly and flattened her pockets. I have clothes if you want to borrow something, said Cheyenne. Livy froze for a second, then bent down to roll the cuffs, making sure they were perfectly even on both sides and all the way around. I have a white shirt. It has buttons. I can tuck it in, she said. What do you think his bride will be like, asked Cheyenne. A full-blown voodoo narcissist like him? Nah, he couldn't take the competition. I predict Anglo-Geisha. I could see that, said Livy. We should at least get drunk before we go. I'd rather do it on his dime, said Livy. I bet inviting us isn't even his idea. I'll bet it's the bride's. Livy smiled. Maybe he has cancer, and his doctor warned him that guilt suppresses the immune system. Cheyenne propelled herself off the back of the stove with her foot. Yes, she said. No, wait, and she held up her hand. I have it. He found God, and God said unto him, Cheyenne threw her arms wide and boomed, stop being such a dick! A dick, a dick. Echo, echo, echo. Neither sister had seen their father since they were 14. The wedding invitation had arrived only 2 weeks before the date of the ceremony, just on the heels of Cheyenne's reappearance, something their mother Kirsten considered prophetic. It was obvious from the short window that the decision to include them was at best the result of a long debate, or at worst an afterthought. Their initial instinct had been to ignore it, and the invitation was repurposed as a coaster for days before it was seriously considered. But in the end, they could not ignore it, because it tapped at a hidden door. Shh, he is a king in a castle. He has only stashed us away in the village to keep us safe. Someday he will call for us, claim us, and make everything right. I kind of understand why we're going to the wedding, said Cheyenne, but why is Mom going? For her own reasons. Without a doubt. Livy's eyes met Cheyenne's for a second and then moved back to the clock. A car honked outside. Kirsten's 20-year-old Toyota was stopped in the middle of the street with hazards on blocking half the road. She was wearing a black velvet camisole with a long black skirt and a black cardigan. There was a ring on every finger and totemic silver jewelry hung around her neck. Tiny zircon studs pierced the indigo blue sun and the crescent moon tattooed on her earlobes. Cheyenne took one look at her mother and saw that she was totally prepared to make an awkward situation more awkward. Get in or we'll miss the ferry, said Kirsten. The dashboard of Kirsten's car rattled with the engine. Keep the windows rolled down, the defroster doesn't work. Kirsten and Cheyenne had not spent any time together since Cheyenne had returned, so Cheyenne had agreed they would go to the wedding together while Livy rode with their brother Essex. The minute Cheyenne got in the car, though, she regretted it. Kirsten had questions about Cheyenne's spiritual analysis of the moment, about her failed marriage, about its aftermath. Cheyenne tried to change the subject to one of Kirsten's many interests, domestic violence legislation, her coven, what books she was reading, but it always just turned back to Cheyenne's psyche and the archetypal trauma that must be feeding her cycles of disintegration. Cheyenne told her mother she was tired and pretended to sleep, but Kirsten kept talking. "You're a mystic by nature," Kirsten said as they drove onto the ferry. "You're drawn to the Shadowlands." Cheyenne rolled over and fell into a deep fake nap. I'm going to read one more paragraph. I say that, but maybe I'm not. Oh no. Yes. As girls, Cheyenne and Livy had been fed a fairy tale. Two women loved the same man. One wanted a baby and the other wanted to chase the North Star. Each became pregnant, and so they made a plan. The one who wanted the baby would take both children, and the one who wanted the North Star would continue on. The first mother was happy and the second mother was happy. But which daughter was which? It drove Cheyenne and Livy fucking batshit crazy. Kirsten had never given them the name or a way to reach the other woman. She had refused to say which girl belonged to which mother, and Livy and Cheyenne had never been able to figure it out. Each sister had Kirsten's black hair and mannerisms, her broad shoulders, but so did a lot of people. Mostly they looked like their dad Cyril, who also had black hair. And every now and then they would think one sister would see something in the other and think that's totally her mouth, but they could never be certain. Paperwork did not clarify anything either. Theirs was a home birth, and Kirsten was listed as the mother on both birth certificates. When they finally got the real story, it didn't help because it wasn't really much different than the fairy tale version. Kirsten met Cyril when Cyril was in grad school. They had an open relationship. Cyril fell in love with a girl who was new to town. The girl and Kirsten became friends. Not long afterward, both women ended up pregnant. And since one was ready for a baby and the other was not, they struck a deal over a bottle of red wine and some tosses of the I Ching. And one woman became a mother of two girls and the other became a Buddhist nun. Cyril, not as much of a polyamorous adventurer as he originally thought, did not stick around. And Kirsten raised the girls alone. So,
thank you for that. You read that wonderfully. I feel like you've definitely had some acting in your life.
No, no. I'm a musician and I've been on stage a lot. But no, I don't have any acting. That's the reason I didn't do the audiobook. There's a wonderful woman who did the audiobook. We were debating between me and her, and everybody decided she was better. So, including and especially me.
I seem to know more authors that don't actually read the version of their audiobook than those that do. So what you've kind of set up here with the passage was the opening of the book, and we're confronted with this non-traditional family for sure. Going to the patriarch's wedding of a fairly young woman that no one has met yet in this family. And they're relatively estranged from Cyril, the dad. He's been not really part of their life, so it's all just kind of a mystery why they're going to the wedding. The two sisters, Cheyenne and Livy, and there's also a brother who's kind of a adopted brother who's Essex, a homeless guy that Cheyenne kind of found, and they all kind of wonderfully brought him in, and he became part of the life of these three women, Kirsten and Cheyenne and Livy. And there's a big disappointment at the wedding because the girls understand that Cyril has something that he wants to give to them. And he ends up rather ceremoniously giving them his medical records so that they know kind of genetically what kind of diseases are in the family. But then importantly as well, he gives them the name of this woman who is supposed to be, according to this myth of the North Star that Kirsten has brought up with the girls, the mother of one girl, but they don't know which. And so from then we kind of go on each kid, Cheyenne, Livy, and Essex kind of personal journey to find out more about this woman, Anne, who is one of their mothers, and then also just kind of finding themselves too, and their identity and where they're going in their life. So it's a very long, I guess, way to open up this question, but kind of what kind of drew you to this kind of non-traditional type of family arrangement?
Oh, I think the people in the book are the people I know. I don't mean literally the people I know, but they're the people I've always known. And I'm always fascinated by people who are very smart and have very bad ideas. And also people who whose pride, I mean, I would say each character has a very big issue with pride. And with each character, it plays out according to their character. So like Cheyenne's pride leads her to do a whole bunch of things that, anybody else just sits there and goes like this, but like it's every character kind of has that. And I think that I'm really interested in philosophies. And what I mean by that is I have this belief that Americans are at heart philosophers in a way that I haven't seen in other countries in the same way. It's partly a delusion of self-invention that is native to American culture. And that, but so it's on the one hand, it's this kind of delusional way that we start from nothing except for what we make up as a myth. And on the other hand, it's sort of like the financial grift of like, what's our angle on the game, right? Because this idea that anybody can like move up if they just play it right, And so I'm really fascinated by those things. And what I mean by that is that, you go to any street corner and talk to an average, person who might be hanging out around there, 2 minutes in, you're going to get their philosophy on life. They're going to actually start to tell you, it's like, here's how I see it. And then it is just going to come into that, that's a very American thing. Yeah. And so I think a lot of times when people are doing things that make no sense, they're adhering deeply to something that makes sense to them. And so that's in there, and money is a big part of this book. I mean, it is the driving incentive for many, many things in this book, and the complexity of how you get from point A to point B is never a straight line for the characters in this book, because there's all these considerations that block them from doing it in the way that is just as simple because they don't have the money to do it. And so I think that's another thing I'm really fascinated with. I've worked as a cab driver. I drove night cab. It's in my bio, so it's not a shock. I worked as a stripper as a teenager. I worked as, I've worked as a waitress. I've worked in like a variety of different areas. And what always struck me is you don't make much money as a cabbie. You don't make much money as a stripper. When you really figure out the taxes, the time you spend, everybody remembers the one great night. And they cut out the other 6 hours. So they cut out the other days that nothing happened and they went home early. And so what it does is, I had to ask, like, why do people work these, why? What's the real appeal of some of this stuff? And it's freedom. You can, I had a cabbie say to me once, the thing I love about this job is I can quit every night and I can start again every morning. And it's that thing of like, I can go down the road and pick it up again, or I can quit, I can leave, I can come back. So everybody's got their angle. When I was driving cab, everybody had their angle on how they were going to make money. There were the people who were going to play the outer burbs. There were the people who were going to run all short runs in the downtown. There were people, but everybody had their thing and they believe in it completely. They're all gamblers. So in some ways, these characters are also all gamblers. And, so the parts of their sort of untraditional nature to me is an aspect of the socioeconomic world they live in too, where you build ties to people and you live with them, you move them in, you take care of them. you do strange things for them. You don't have the money to be distant from them in some way. You can't just say, here, go do this. So there's ways that the characters make choices around each other too, that is all driven by money, about what they have to put on the line.
Yeah. There's, in almost an absurd way, Cyril seems to be totally oblivious, although he is quite a wealthy man, but he's got he's got these daughters and this ex-wife that are really scraping by to just try to make ends meet, and he's perhaps willfully blind, just seems to have no conception. And I think that what you were saying about freedom is really interesting as well, because there's very much a dichotomy going on in the book between, for instance, Anne, who is the other mother, who's also known as Justine. But she's kind of refuses to be tied down. She's got, her whole identity and what she thinks that she's moving towards is all about not having obligations to other people and kind of being free. And then you've got Kirsten, who's, raising these kids and trying to kind of help them find their way. And she's got obligations, and each of the three kids it feels like they're trying to kind of find where they fall in that continuum to having like real human connections with other people versus just being out there autonomous on their own.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Livy in particular is a character that's just obsessed with total autonomy in all sorts of ways. And Cheyenne, is, I think, trying to break free of something. It's, there's a line in there that, she had freedom. What she wanted was liberation. Like there's a way that Cheyenne is just trying to break free from something. And in Cyril, like when I put him in, the intention with him, because he's not in, as you know, he's not in the book very much, was I thought about, you mentioned the Odyssey before. So I think a lot about myth, and I think a lot about, I'm very formed by it. And I always think about the apple, the golden apple that gets thrown in front of the three goddesses, for the fairest, go fight. And it's that catalyst, that starts things off. And that was the way I wanted to position Cyril. He's the sort of obnoxious, who made you whatever, but like he's the obnoxious person who throws in the sort of like, here's an address, go fight, go, whatever it does to you, have fun. And like he says at one point earlier on in the book, and I think this sort of sums up how I think about him, is, he's one of those rich people who views his wealth as the natural fruit of a spiritual voyage. You know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
a way that he is completely, feels absolutely zero responsibility to the girls or to Kirsten, because he thinks if they were, and there's a lot of that, stuff out there, the secret, like there's a lot of that idea out there that like, oh, you're only poor or stuck or not, something because, you didn't internally manifest what you were, like there's just a lot of gross, anyway. But Cyril is he's not a character that's in there very long, but I did think of him as sort of like the bad Greek god that set something in motion without any respect for what it was going to do to people's lives.
Well, I was gonna go to this at a different time later in the conversation, but I kind of thought you do some really interesting things with some historical figures, with Sir Walter Raleigh, with John A. Lejeune. And I really kind of thought of Cyril as kind of a modern counterpart to those people, just kind of conquerors going out there, colonizing, doing their thing, very arrogant, and um, and not really giving a damn about the consequences. And I really admired your ability to kind of bring in their storylines, because one of the things that you do so well in this book as well is talk about nature and how we've kind of from an environmental standpoint colonized a lot of nature to the detriment of animals and wildlife and just nature and the environment. And then, of course, with Sir Walter Raleigh, all of the horrible just chain reaction of disaster that was, you know, in his wake. Were you Did that kind of come organically as you were writing the book to bring those kind of historical figures in, or was that something that you kind of had in your mind's eye as you were thinking about putting the novel together?
No, it's totally organic. I don't plan things out when I write, and I consider it, you know, real success, and try to make sure I get 3/4 of the way through a book before I know at all how it's going to end. Like, I really believe in writing your way into a corner. I think it forces creativity, and I think that, like, it also makes you an honest decision maker. So, for instance, as you're ruling, you know, fundamentally, the way I see the novel is it is a you start page one is all possibilities collapsing to zero, right? Like, once you get to the end, you have exhausted. There's no more possibility in that book. It is, you know, you have made every choice all the way along, and you end up there, and it's done. So, in that, as you're making a choice going through, you are cutting off a whole bunch of other possibilities. So I kind of believe in following your instinct into what you cut off without sort of protecting for the end, if that makes sense. So if I'm sitting here going like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to land this thing, maybe I better not cut that off. Maybe I better not cut that off, because, you know, I could end up here. But then, only for my process, I know everybody else does these things differently in myriad ways. But I think that I like the sort of head-on collision version where I just keep writing, and sometimes I get really close. I'm like, no idea how I'm going to do this, you know? So I think with the ghosts, as they're kind of ghosts, yeah. Things like that for me, you know, in Zazen, which was my first novel, there was a similarity in one role of a rat queen. And I would get people saying, is the rat queen real? You know, what is it supposed to be? And I guess I don't want to choose. You know what I mean? Like, they're real and they're not real because they're in that space. They're in the meta space of the book. So, you know, the book has an epilogue. And in that epilogue, the Livy and Cheyenne in that epilogue are no longer the Livy. I mean, like, they're the meta. Like, there is a way that these characters go to a world of their own, I think, in some ways. But it was more like, when I'm trying to say something and I'm trying to put it into words and I'm trying to get at something that is hard to nail down, sometimes I find that, you know, or I did in this book, that, you know, Raleigh just ended up appearing in the book, you know. And I think that the other thing that is foundational in this, my understanding of this book from the beginning with the characters, is these are characters in late stage capitalism. These are characters who do know that they live on stolen land. They do know that there's all sorts of things they were born into that they did not choose, and that they have no way to extricate themselves from. And they're also driven by their own freedoms. They're driven by their own desire to, like, make a decent life one way or another. But that those tensions are there, and that's the, you know, we as a country, I mean, I'm very interested in the American project, obviously, I think, in a lot of ways. As a country, you know, we cannot escape how we were founded. And that's not just slavery, like, it's not just genocide. It's every good and bad or treacherous or misguided thing that came before, you know. And so the idea of America is this idea that, you know, you can come here as an immigrant and have no history and start from scratch. But the reality is that we do live in a historical narrative as well. And so Raleigh, you know, made a lot of sense to me as he was going into it. So I felt, yeah, I now talked way too much about Sir Walter Raleigh. I will stop.
No, I think it's fascinating, you know, because you hear a lot of different modes of writing a novel. It's a big project, you know, and you read about people that like map out every single character in the book down to
Oh,
the detail, or whiteboard every movement of the plot, and everyone does it a little bit differently. So I think it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah. I usually start by free writing dialogue.
The dialogue in this book is really good, and I think part of the reason is because you brought so much of your own breadth of experience into the book. I knew I had no idea that driving a cab worked this way with like with when you don't have a lease on your own cab, you know, you're just constantly just kind of these um, waiting around for the next opportunity, and these shifts and how they, you know, they decide who's going to get, you know, time in the car. And it was really eye-opening to me. I found it to be really fascinating. And probably the most fascinating, and there's the sea is a big kind of character in the book as well. And I loved how the brother's name, you named him Essex, for the whale ship, because I love that whole story. I read the book about the whale ship Essex a while
Yeah,
back. It's a great
I
story.
love that book. It affected me. The whale story of the whale ship Essex is something I'm deeply obsessed with, and obviously it's in the book.
Yes. But you spent some time, I read in the afterword in the acknowledgments, on a tall ship, which is what Livy does. Um, Tell us about that. Were you in Alaska on the tall ship, or?
Alaska. Yeah, I'm a terrible tall ship sailor, but yeah, no, I ended up um, going out for a month as a sail trainee, you know, unqualified deckhand uh, on U.S. Brig Niagara, which is the flagship of the state of Pennsylvania, and it's housed in Erie. It runs the Great Lakes, and they were kind enough to let me come on and work, and it was brutal. You know, I think it was a little bit more so that summer than other summers because there had been they were under what their crew was expected to be by a certain amount. And so, you know, it was 18-hour days, you know, and we slept because it's very traditional in Niagara and it's very regimented in a way that I think, as I've talked to other people who've worked on tall ships, that other tall ships aren't as much, but was super helpful for me. It's probably really good for sailing too, which is, it was a lot of Navy people who were on the ship. So there was very much this sort of, you know, we scrub the decks twice a day. I mean, it's very rough though. And I think that that's one of the things that was really different about it is everybody's view of that work is like, oh, you know, hey matey, let's go to sea, but it's really, really rough work. And the second you pull away from dock, and in fact, one of the characters says this, you just got 19th century problems. Like you really do. It's, and there's that, again, like cabbies, like strippers, like I think there's this sort of itinerant workforce that is caught sometimes in this loop, you know, of just getting back on the boat, you know, like you spend all your time, which is very traditional, right? Like you spend all your time going like, when this boat is done, I'm getting off, I'm quitting, I'm doing something else, you know, because you really don't make much money at all. I mean, it's really, really low wages and it's such rough work. But it's amazing too. And you know, it's like most people, this is all my experience. Other people know a lot more about this than I do. But it's like most peak experiences, like 90% of it's hell and 5% of it you don't remember and 5% is just great, you know, and like you walk away and then that's sort of in your mind. I I had some very intense experiences on the boat in different ways, but like I was on for a month, right? And we were doing, it was the tall ship summer, and we did a huge battle reenactment, which I did not know we were going to do. Somehow I missed that. And so then I heard, oh, we're going to do this reenactment. I'm like, okay, fine, you know, and we were pulling in to Put in Bay, you know, Ohio, and they're reenacting the Battle of Lake Erie, which the Niagara is actually the flagship that won the Battle of Lake Erie and drew the Canadian US border. And I kind of got like, so we were important. I knew it was happening the next day. And that night, like the Ohio State Marching Band was playing on like right next to the ship. And there was a fireworks display that cost more money than probably the entire educational budget of Ohio, but whatever, it like went off overhead, and there were 7,000 boats, tiny boats that all paid money to like watch the reenactment. And like there was helicopters and the Discovery Channel. Like I was totally not prepared for what I thought. I had no idea that's what we were getting. So we went and reenacted the battle. And that was funny because, you know, it was, well, some things are best kept at sea. Anyway, they were great to me. They put up with me. I was not, you know, I am not a rock climber. I did work aloft. I did, you know, go up sometimes and do work up there, but I would never overestimate any of my talents as a tall ship sailor.
Well, the scenes when Livy's on the boat in Alaska, and particularly that scene where she goes aloft for the first time, that's just like, I mean, that is really a thrilling kind of heart-pounding scene. And I don't think that anyone that didn't have a little bit of an experience kind of with that would have been able to write anything nearly that convincing. It's a really...
I couldn't have read any of it without working on it. I learned a whole bunch about that world by talking to people and living in it for a month. And so when it came to writing, I think very physically. And so when I sit down to write, I have to know where my, like at any given point, I can tell you what's in arm's length around my character. And that's the way I need to understand a ship. So, you know, no, I took all of that from sort of lived experience, except for that I also learned, I think I said this in the afterward, you know, the Niagara was a very disciplined ship and was, you know, had an amazing crew and was very regimented in a lot of ways, very traditionally. And so I saw what you're supposed to do. And from that, I extrapolated back for the ship that's in the book, which is a very shoddy, messed up ship.
Yes.
What you shouldn't do, you know? And then I had a friend of mine who's a tall ship sailor who sailed all over the world, work with me on just making sure that I remembered the things I needed to remember. And it gave me a lot of confidence that he did that just because it made me feel more comfortable, you know.
Well, getting back to some of the philosophy that's in the book, I think perhaps my favorite character in the book, or one of them, is a kind of an ancillary, well, I won't presume to say any of your characters are ancillary, but is Jershi.
Yes, yeah, he's perfect to talk about because you're in Texas.
I love this guy, not necessarily because he's a Texan, but I love his philosophy in life. Tell us a little bit, set the stage about kind of what he is and what his big project is.
So that chapter is actually the most important chapter to me in the book. And to me, in some ways, that chapter is what the book's about, which is, what does it mean to try to do something great that nobody sees? What if there's no acclaim one way or another? Like, what does it mean to go for a kind of perfection that is absolutely unimportant with the rest of the world? And she's a Czech immigrant who's come over, and he's a Mason, and he's building a very small very serious little castle and, in South Texas. And so, but there's, I think I was trying to show there's a vulnerability to who he is in all of that. He is an artist. He is very particular about what he wants, what things, how they should be done and what it means and all of that. And at the same time, he is deeply, deeply clear in a way that Cheyenne, when she meets them, is definitely not. That what he has to offer is of no interest to anyone. And in that scene, I think she says to him, when did you get okay with being nothing?
Yes.
And this goes into one of my main interests in writing the book, which was this idea that like there's a second coming of age in people's 30s a lot of times, where every idea you had about what you wanted to do or be, and what was good to do or be and what mattered and what didn't from your teens and late teen years, you know, you've tried at that point to see if you can make it happen. And you basically what you've hit is you've run out of potential mattering. You know, now it's all about what you can show. And people break away at that point and they settle or they shift or they integrate in a different way. But what happens is a fundamental retelling of the story of self. And then there are people, and the characters in the book are like this, who are at that point and they still believe what they believe to a way, you know, in a way. And they're going, do I find another way in? Do I find another way in? How can I find another way in? And in that sense, it's very much a 19th century novel. Like, what's the social status? Who's your parentage? What were you born? You know, all of that. But to me, Yershi's really at the heart of that fear of when do you get okay with being nothing? You know, and that's a kind of profound courage that he exhibits right alongside a devotion to perfection and beauty. And I just, so he's a very meaningful character to me in the book. And yeah, so.
Yeah, I thought that it's very profound because, and he's a very beautiful person because he's just, this is a labor of love for him, and no detail goes perfected for him. You know, he spends hours, no one sees his work, he lives alone, he's a solitary figure. And you've got these other characters that are driving across the country or sailing the high seas trying to figure out who I am, what does it all mean? And this guy in his own kind of quiet, very understated way has kind of figured it out for himself. And it's very beautiful, especially when she says that's so profound when Cheyenne says that, you know, when did you become okay with, you know, being nothing? You know, and his rejoinder is kind of, he's got pride in the perfection that he takes in doing the stained glass and, you know, kind of just building this thing that's important to him and probably not to anyone else. I really did appreciate that part.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, there's a sadness too in it. Like, I think the book deals with grief in a very particular way and doesn't shirk from it. And I think that's also part of his answer is that too, not in the sense of self-pity or any of that. He really doesn't have that. But I think that's also just how that human experience of, you know, wow, there's billions of us, you know, and we're going to live and we're going to die and we're going to make things and we're not, you know what I mean? Like, there's this sense of where you come into recognizing what your place or isn't. And I think that's And yeah, again, obviously he has to do with America as well. The book's not going to die for lack of pretensions, let me put it that way. Like, you know.
I I also found very interesting another character, Sarah, who is Livy's love interest in the book. They meet on the high seas, or in Alaska. Actually, they're not in the seas at the time, I guess. But and I noticed something that you again put in your afterword about how there was a period of time in your life when you were you very much thought that social activism and political cause was, you know, what the world was all about and what your life perhaps was about. And Sarah's very much like that, right? She's very dedicated to this cause. Did you feel, I mean, is there a little bit of you in Sarah's character, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a little bit of me in every character to some way. I think most authors will tell you that. You know, so that's true. I would say that that issue is still a very hard one for me. Um, I worked as a union organizer years ago, and it was and you know, really worked hard at it, and was around some really amazing, powerful, principled leaders that I learned from, and it was very hard to leave. But there's not really a way that at least with my personality, you know, I said to somebody the other day, they asked me something, I said, yeah, well, the thing is, whatever I'm into, that's all I'm into. You know what I mean? That's a little bit how I am. And so it wasn't a way for me to be an organizer and also be an artist. Like, that wasn't possible. I was in music at that time, and that was my primary focus. And then come, you know, uh, these last years, it's been very hard to not be in organizing because of the state of the country, because, you know, I kind of feel like every hand is needed. And so when the book was finished, in terms of editorial work, for the most part, it had a home, I went back to work as an organizer. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm about to take book leave, and then I'm going to come back and work as an organizer for a period of time. And what that actually means is I will not be writing for another year. Like, whatever I can write in the next 2 months is what I will write for the next year. Like, it is just not possible for me to do both. And so I think there's times we make certain decisions, and so I can relate to Sarah, you know, and her focus on what she's doing and what it means to her and the lengths she's willing to go, although I don't necessarily go to the lengths she goes to. And I think it's a really hard call right in this moment in time for those of us. I have another friend who's an organizer who's incredibly talented, and he's also an incredibly talented comedian who has a real career. And like, it is hard to figure out. For me, it's more like that it's a different part of my personality. Mm-hmm. So I can't switch in and out. So it's not just the time, it's that I can't switch in and out. But I feel like I'm making the right decision
right now. Well, we wish you all the luck on that. Before we close, I want to ask you about the title, The Great Offshore Grounds. And I think that's I don't know, when I see that title, I think Wales, like, mm-hmm. We were talking about the Essex, and the breeding grounds of some of the whales. And so I wondered, tell me how you picked the title.
So it definitely comes from that. The Great Offshore Grounds, I'll just restate it for people who haven't obsessed on whale ship Essex and 1820s whaling. The Great Offshore Grounds, as the whales were hunted into extinction, you know, whalers had to go farther and further out to find whales, which is what happens with the story of the whale ship Essex. Is that, you know, and I think what I related to in some of that is, you know, this is the dawn of American capitalism that then eventually leads into American imperialism and all these things. But it's also, they're beginning to approach peak oil in their own time with the only source they have. And so there's this drive towards peak oil that is sending people, you know, like the lay, which is the percentage of the ship you would get as going out on the ship. The lay is getting longer, meaning like it used to be this percentage and now it's like 0.0008 after 3 years. So the lay is getting longer, the journey is getting longer. They're going out for 3 and 4 years, but there's this magical land where there's still whales. You know, it's the breeding ground that's been untouched. And it's just sort of this way that we are always looking to have this place that of such abundance that it solves us from ourselves, you know, that it is the solution to our habits and desires, you know. And so and also just the kind of people who ended up on ships, to me, is also part of like what we see in the sort of gig economy American field right now. So the Great Offshore Grounds is that place where nobody really knows what it is. They don't quite know where it is. But when they get there, they're going to be able to, you know, like, then it's going to be easy. So to me, it felt a lot like the way America functions a lot of times. And obviously, you know, the whale ship Essex is what Moby Dick wrote about Moby Dick, based on the idea from that. And so I saw parallels with that when I was writing. And I think that I meant it in the sense of America, in the sense of, you know, it is a delusion and a desire, and it's a real place that we can't get to, and maybe we shouldn't go at all. And like, you know, all of those things together, to me, is why I chose that title.
Yeah, I didn't. When you talk about the philosophy of the book and late stage capitalism, in the Essex, they end up eating each other. I mean,
they do. They in fact end up eating most of them, and they're jerks. They burn the Galapagos. You know, I've never rooted for people to like eat each other more than reading the whale ship Essex.
In some ways, you could say that that's what we're doing in our day and age. We're eating each other.
Absolutely.
Vanessa, thanks so much for joining us. This is really an interesting and fun book. It's a family drama, but it's also adventure. So much adventure in this book. And I really loved reading it. I'm going to love putting this in customers' hands at the store. And thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.